Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, my hometown, out in Minnesota. We had a little scare. We had some warm weather, but finally winter arrived here this last week, and there was snow in the air. It just came down so beautifully, and it got cold, 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 and people got out their woolen jackets and their gloves and their mittens, and they brought firewood into the house with those little diamond tufts of snow falling from them. A full moon out this week, and so the whole earth turns into this amazing, beautiful, cold planet at which we are visitors here to learn something. We're not sure exactly what it might be. Winter's so beautiful, and then you wake up in the morning and you get these sunrises, pink and purple and golden, and your children sit grumbling over their oatmeal and whimpering, and you put them into warm clothes and you push them out the door. They look back over your shoulders with this needy look on their faces. Couldn't you drive them to school? No, darling, I am not going to deprive you of this essential experience, to walk down to the end of that long driveway and to stand out there with the wind to your back, hunched down like some old buffalo in the cold and feeling your tears freeze on your cheeks. This is a crucial experience for this young person. This will save you from self-pity, from delusion later in life. Adversity, we need it. We thrive on it. We set out to make our lives easy and comfortable because that's the rational thing. But that's not what it's about. Comfort is not what it's about. Any 15-year-old kid knows that it's not about comfort. It's about bravery and about enterprise and about comedy and about knowledge, the search for knowledge. And you don't learn anything sitting watching the Three Stooges on TV. You got to get out there. And even though going to a party when you're 18, do you remember this? When you were 18, 19, you're going to a party, you don't know most of the people there. It's like an expedition across the Antarctic. It's dangerous. You hear all that music, you hear people yelling inside, and you know that the moment you open that door, they're all going to turn on you and stare at you and judge you in a split second and see you for the dweeb you are and the dork, the nerd, the misfit that you are. But you brave it because they're in that group of savages, and there may be that one person that you want to know, that true friend. And so you venture into that party despite all of your fears. You learn this when you're a child, walking out the door and down to the end of the long driveway into a cold winter wind and waiting for the bus. It's not about comfort, it's about bravery. So this is the season for it. Christmas was never easy or comfortable for us. Oh, sometimes it was. Sometimes. My mother had a big campaign. This was the long march for my mother, the month of December, because Christmas had to rise to a very high standard. And she did Christmas over the opposition of my father, who did not approve of this at all. To him, it was vulgar, it was a waste of money, and it was practically sacrilege that all these people who didn't really care about Jesus were observing his birth. So she had to move covertly to make this tremendous Christmas, and a long campaign of shopping and cleaning and baking and decorating and wrapping. Every gift had to be wrapped beautifully. You didn't just wrap it up and slap some Scotch tape on it like you were wrapping ground meat or something. It had to have a ribbon, it had to have a bow on it, the purpose of which was to postpone opening it. So you wouldn't just rip the paper off it. So you had this moment of anticipation, which made the present more precious. She went through this big struggle to give us Christmas. There'd be moments, evenings, when she would take a rest and she would plop down on the sofa and she would turn the lights on the tree, and she would put the Mormon Tabernacle Choir on the turntable and listen to Christmas carols and put her feet up. But she was working hard towards the finish line, towards Christmas Eve. And then you had the big task of Christmas, the true meaning of Christmas, was not perfume or cologne or books or so forth. It was visiting people, visiting your relatives, especially those who were shut in, especially those who were old, maybe not that interesting, maybe people who weren't visited often for very good reasons. You went to visit the crotchety and the infirm and the lunatics. You went to see them. Oh, you brought them some fruitcake, you brought them a poinsettia, and you were kind to them. You sat and you listened to them. There were old people who were sad, old people who were bitter. There was old Aunt Jane who believed that if you didn't hope for anything, you'd never be disappointed. You know, she just kind of depressed. And there was Cousin Norman he didn't seem to know who we were, but we went to see him anyway, and we had a conversation with him, although he didn't say much of anything. He just would say, well, isn't that something, he'd say. So we'd sort of carry on this weird conversation with him. We went to church this morning. Well, isn't that something? Yeah. We sang, O Come, Emmanuel. You don't say. Yeah. We went downstairs. Well, isn't that something? We had coffee afterwards. Oh, isn't that something? You don't say. Christmas was not an easy time for my mother because she was an anxious woman. She feared all sorts of things. She feared communists taking over America. She feared jet airplane flying overhead and crashing into our house and incinerating us all. She feared about leaving an iron on and burning the house down. She worried about all sorts of things, about car crashes. And around Christmas time, she worried about a Christmas tree fire, about the tree catching on fire. Such an irony to bring a thing of beauty into your home and it kills you. But there had been a Christmas tree fire at the Morrow house, and she remembered this very well, the whole story, how they went to bed that night and the tree had been left on for hours and hours, and there had not been fresh water put into the pail, and instantaneous combustion, it went up, and the faithful dog barking and arousing the family, and them all tearing out into the snow and standing there barefoot in the snow, watching the house and the presents and everything just go up in flames. That was a permanent vision in my mother's mind. Her children standing barefoot in the snow, watching their lives go up in this conflagration. And so ours was a house where the Christmas tree was mostly left dark. It had hours. There was certain hours when it was turned on, and there was always a pail of water right next to the tree, always. And when we went to bed at night, she soaked a bed sheet in water and covered the tree with it. And even so, I don't think that she slept very well. And we invited Uncle Jack over to our house for Christmas Eve. He was the bachelor uncle. He was not easy to have around. He smoked, he drank. We didn't approve of that. He lived all by himself in that little farmhouse with that aluminum-legged table with a Formica counter and 3 chairs and a cot, and that was all, and a stove. That's all he had. He just lived in one room. The others were stuffed full of junk. He never combed his hair, so it just stuck out at all different angles. He was a difficult person. And I remember him coming and talking in this big loud voice because he wasn't around people that much. He was a bachelor uncle. And he talked in a big loud voice about the war. He'd been in the war. He wanted you to know that. Iwo Jima, that flag raising, that was just a big hoax. I tell you, they staged that whole thing. That photographer staged. I was there. I know what happened. There were 2 Marines who raised a flag, but the photographer wasn't there, so they got these other guys to put it up. It was a big hoax. MacArthur, boy, you asked me about MacArthur, and I'll tell you about MacArthur. There was a phony. He never went anywhere without a can. That was my Uncle Jack. He just had this monologue going. He'd tell you everything about his life, things you didn't want to know. The last time he'd been to the went into the doctor, and the plumbing checked out, and he gave me this paper cup, and he poked a hole in the bottom with a pencil. He told me to go in there and whiz. So I went in there and I whizzed, and he came in. I filled it up, and there was still some pee left in it. It was trickling out the bottom. He took a look. He said, "No, I think you've got a blockage here. So you got to give up drinking coffee." I said, "Hey, I'm not going to give up drinking coffee. I'd die first." He said, "Well, that's your choice. $10 he charged me for that advice. Never going to go back to that man. Over my dead body, let me tell you." That was my uncle. He had this kind of ratchety sawmill voice to him. We were sitting there around the Christmas tree. The lights were on. We were watching it carefully for any signs of flame, and he was sitting by the fireplace. My dad was sort of dozing on the couch, kind of responding to Uncle Jack. "Oh, is that so? Is that right? Yeah, oh." Uncle Jack carrying on. He was sitting by the fireplace because he was smoking a cigarette, and that way he could exhale into the chimney, and he wouldn't bother anybody. He was drinking whiskey out of a glass, which ordinarily we wouldn't allow, but it was Christmas. So you didn't comment on these things. Kindness at Christmas. I was sitting there dreaming of the things I wished that I would get for Christmas: the X-ray glasses that could see through clothing, and the belching powder, and the Dick Tracy wrist radio, and things I knew I wasn't going to get. I knew what I was going to get. I was going to get a package of white underwear. I was going to get white socks. I was going to get a little Christian novel for boys where characters say things like, "Boy, that scripture drill this morning was more fun than a barrel of monkeys." And then suddenly I came out of my reverie, and Uncle Jack had stood up, and he had a cigarette lighter in his hand, and he's saying, "These trees aren't flammable. Fresh trees, they're not flammable. People treat them like they were tissue paper. They're not flammable." And he flicked it, and a little flame appeared. And the moment that flame appeared, I could hear my mother's hooves in the hallway. She was galloping in. She snatched that flame out of midair. She threw it in the bucket of water. She grabbed Uncle Jack by the collar, and she heaved him out the front door into a snowbank. And she grabbed his jacket and his scarf and his gloves, and she threw them out after him and slammed the door. And he took off, walking slowly down the long driveway, looking back over his shoulder as if he thought maybe she might relent and let him come back in, as if maybe my dad might get in the car and offer him a ride home. But it's not the worst thing to walk a couple miles in the cold. It's not going to kill you. It's going to teach you something. You learn character. You learn to persist, bravery, enterprise, comedy, knowledge. That's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.